You have read the advice. You have followed the steps. Maybe you have even had months where it felt like things were finally clicking, like the version of your life you keep picturing was close enough to touch. And then it leveled out, and you were still here. Here is the part nobody says plainly. The person sitting across from you at a dinner table who has twice your net worth at the same age is not working twice as hard. They are probably not smarter. They did not necessarily start earlier, know more people, or catch a better break. So what is the actual difference? Because there has to be one. The results are real. The gap is real. But the explanation you have been given your whole life, the one about effort and timing and circumstance, does not hold up when you look at it closely. It falls apart. What if the gap is not financial at all? What if the distance between your current life and the one you keep imagining is not measured in dollars or hours or connections, but in something sitting much closer to you than any of those things? There is a specific psychological structure that wealthy people carry inside them, not as a result of having money but before it. And that structure is not mysterious. It is not inherited. It is not a gift. It is learnable. It is precise. And once you see exactly what it is, you will not be able to unsee it. You are about to see it. Chapter 1. It was never about the money. Across every era of recorded human experience, there is a pattern that refuses to disappear. Civilizations rise and fall, currencies change, technologies replace each other. And yet in every generation, in every corner of the world, the same division appears. A small number of people accumulate wealth with what looks like ease. A large number of people work just as hard, sometimes harder, and stay exactly where they began. The difference is almost never what it appears to be on the surface. It is not talent most of the time. It is not luck, though people reach for that explanation first. There is something operating beneath the visible level, something in the way a person relates to money, to themselves, to what they believe they deserve and what they believe is possible. You are listening to this right now because you sense that gap. You may not have named it yet, but you feel it, and what you are about to hear will give it a name. Here is where it begins. Not with a strategy, not with a savings rate, but with two people who started in exactly the same place. Marcus and Daniel grew up in the same neighborhood, attended the same high school, and worked the same warehouse job for 6 years in their mid-20s. They were not close friends, but they knew each other well enough. When Marcus was 28, his uncle passed away and left him $43,000. 3 months later, a legal settlement landed Daniel the same amount, almost to the dollar. $43,000 each. Same starting point. No advantage on either side. Within 4 years, Marcus had turned that money into a down payment on a small rental property, started a modest landscaping business on the side, and had roughly $90,000 in combined assets. Within 3 years, Daniel had nothing. The money was gone, not stolen, not lost in a scam. Spent slowly in ways that felt reasonable at the time. A newer truck. A vacation he felt he deserved after years of hard work. Loans to family members that never came back. Small purchases that added up to large ones. And then one day the account was simply empty, and Daniel was back at the warehouse, working the same hours, telling himself that $43,000 was never really enough to change anything anyway. Stop there for a moment. Because that last sentence Daniel told himself is the most important thing in this chapter. What separated Marcus and Daniel was not intelligence. It was not financial education, because neither of them had much. It was not discipline in the narrow sense, because Daniel was not a reckless person by nature. What separated them was the identity each man carried about what kind of person he was in relation to money. Marcus, without being able to articulate it, believed the money was the beginning of something. Daniel, without realizing it, believed the money was a temporary visitor. And the way each man treated those $43,000 followed directly from what each man believed about himself. This is the open question at the center of everything. Not how do you get more money, but who do you believe you are when money arrives? Most financial advice skips that question entirely. It goes straight to tactics. Budgeting systems, investment vehicles, passive income streams, side businesses. And those things are not useless, but they are downstream of something more fundamental. You can hand two people the identical strategy and watch them produce entirely different results. Strategy sits on top of identity the way furniture sits on top of a foundation. If the foundation is cracked, it does not matter how carefully you arrange the furniture. Revisit the person you were 3 years earlier as it really was, not in terms of your bank account specifically, but in terms of how you thought about money when it was in your hands. Did you feel like you were supposed to have it? Did you feel like it would stay? Or did it feel faintly temporary, like something that passed through rather than something that accumulated? You do not have to say the answer out loud, but hold it, because the feeling you just recalled is not a memory. It is a live signal about the identity you are currently operating from. This is what researchers who study wealth over time consistently find. Two people in identical financial circumstances, same income, same debt load, same city, same opportunities, will diverge completely over a 10-year period, not because of strategy or luck, because of the psychological identity each person carries. One person sees themselves as someone who builds, the other sees themselves as someone who gets by. Every financial decision, every small choice about how to allocate the next dollar, flows from whichever of those two self-images is running in the background. Psychologists sometimes call this a set point. You may have heard it framed as a thermostat. Your internal thermostat is calibrated to a certain level of financial comfort. When your bank account rises above that level, unconscious behavior pulls it back down. When it drops below that level, survival instincts kick in to bring it back up. Daniel did not consciously decide to spend his inheritance. His thermostat was set to a certain ceiling, and when money arrived that pushed him above it, his behavior corrected without him noticing. The truck purchase felt like a reward. The loans to family felt like the right thing to do. The vacation felt earned. None of it felt like sabotage. That is what makes the thermostat so precise. It does not feel like self-destruction. It feels like common sense. Marcus had a different setting, not because he was smarter or more virtuous, but because somewhere in his history he had absorbed a different story about what kind of person he was. His father had owned a small business, nothing grand, a car detailing shop that barely turned a profit, but Marcus had grown up watching a man treat money as something to be directed rather than merely received. That is it, that one distinction, directed versus received. Marcus saw money as raw material. Daniel saw it as relief. Later on, we will get to a point about discipline and financial success that breaks with the story most people inherited. Once you grasp that turn, it immediately changes how you act. For now, understand this. The gap between where you are and where you want to be is not primarily a gap in information. You have access to more financial information today than any generation in human history. The strategy is not the barrier. The psychological distance between your current identity and the identity of a person who builds wealth is the barrier. That distance has a specific shape. It is made of specific beliefs, specific emotional responses to money arriving, specific stories you tell yourself about what is realistic for someone like you. Someone like you. That phrase is worth sitting with, because who exactly is someone like you? You probably have a fairly detailed answer. The details might include where you grew up, what your parents did or did not have, what has and has not worked for you so far. And those details feel like facts. They feel like accurate descriptions of your circumstances. But they are also, in part, a character you are playing. A role with a particular financial ceiling written into it. And here is the thing about a role. You can step out of it, not by pretending the past did not happen, but by recognizing that the past built an identity, and identities can be examined, and examined identities can change. This is not optimism, this is mechanics. A person who believes, at a cellular level, that wealth belongs to them, that it is natural for them to accumulate it, that they are the kind of person who builds rather than spends, makes different micro-decisions every single day. Not dramatic decisions, tiny ones. Whether to put $100 somewhere it can grow or whether to spend it because spending it feels normal. Whether to take a meeting with someone interesting or whether to decide it is probably nothing. Whether to read the clause in the contract or whether to trust that it will be fine. The millionaire is not making these decisions from willpower. They are making them from identity. It costs them almost nothing. It is simply what they do because it is who they are. Your single job in this book is not to copy millionaire strategies. Your job is to close the identity gap, to find with precision the exact place where your self-image diverges from the self-image of someone who builds wealth naturally, and to work on that precise point rather than on the surface-level behaviors that are merely symptoms of it. You looked in the mirror and you saw your bank balance. That is looking at the surface. The real reflection goes deeper than that. By the end of this book, you will be looking at something else entirely. Wealth is not a portfolio. Wealth is a personality. And personalities, unlike luck, are things you can actually do something about. The question waiting for you in the next chapter is not what should you do. It is who, precisely, are you right now, and where did that person come from? Chapter 2. The mirror shows you who wins. Who you are right now is not a mystery. Most people believe they do not know themselves well enough. They spend years searching, reading, reflecting, waiting for some deeper self-knowledge to arrive before they take meaningful action. That belief is wrong. Not incomplete. Wrong. You already know exactly who you are. The mirror shows you every single morning. The problem is not that you cannot see yourself. The problem is that you have been taught to look at the wrong things when you do. That distinction is what this entire chapter is built around. By the time you finish it, the reflection staring back at you will carry a meaning it has never carried before. The last chapter ended with a question. Who, precisely, are you right now, and where did that person come from? That question was not rhetorical. It was a diagnosis waiting to happen. The gap between where you are financially and where you want to be is not a gap in effort. It is not a gap in timing or luck, or which family you were born into. It is a gap between two different versions of a person's identity, and only one of those versions has been built for accumulating wealth. Here is what that means in real life. Think about the last time you received a raise, a tax return, or any amount of money that felt like a small windfall. Maybe it was $400. Maybe it was 2,000. Think about what happened to that money within 30 days. If you are honest with yourself, and this chapter only works if you are, that money is gone. Not because you are irresponsible, not because you are undisciplined, because your internal thermostat, the one set long before you were old enough to question it, returned your account balance to the temperature it knows as normal. That thermostat is identity, and it runs deeper than habits, deeper than budgets, deeper than any spreadsheet you have ever opened with good intentions on a Sunday night. Consider a woman named Renata. She grew up watching her mother count cash at the kitchen table every Thursday night, separating what was owed from what was left, which was almost nothing. Renata was bright. She studied hard, got the job, got the promotion. By 28, she was making more money than anyone in her family ever had. And yet, her apartment was too expensive for her income. Her credit cards held a balance she kept meaning to address. Every time her account reached a number that felt like safety, something would happen. A car repair, a flight home, a birthday gift she could not bring herself to skip, and the number would drop back to familiar. Renata was not reckless. She was thermostatic. Her internal setting for money was not abundance or scarcity in the abstract. It was a specific emotional temperature she had inherited from watching those Thursday nights. And her financial behavior, without any conscious instruction, kept returning her to it. The money was never the issue. Renata was the issue, and so are you, not as an accusation, as a diagnosis. What is a thermostat exactly? It does not decide what temperature feels right. It only enforces the setting it was given. Until someone deliberately changes the setting, it will keep doing its job perfectly. The problem is that most people spend their entire adult lives trying to override the thermostat, putting in more hours, cutting expenses, following systems, without ever touching the dial. You can blow hot air into a house all winter. If the thermostat is set to 55 degrees, the furnace will run itself into the ground just to stay in place. Now here is the thing about Renata that matters. She did not change her habits first. She changed what she believed she was. She stopped narrating her financial life as the daughter of a woman who counted cash on Thursday nights. She started narrating it as someone who made deliberate decisions about money because that was who she was, not what she was trying to become. Within 8 months, the same income that had evaporated for years began to accumulate. Same salary, completely different result. Wealth, it turns out, is not a portfolio. It is a personality. This is the open loop you should hold onto right now. If wealth is a personality, what specifically are the traits that make it up? And which of those traits are you currently missing? That is exactly where this chapter is heading. The answer is more specific than you probably expect. As this book keeps moving, we will get to a point about discipline and financial success that breaks with the story most people inherited. When that point settles, it immediately changes how you act every single day. But first, the inventory. There are 5 psychological traits that appear with remarkable consistency in people who build wealth. Across different industries, different generations, and different starting points, these are not personality types you are born with. They are orientations, ways of positioning yourself in relation to money, risk, time, and identity. They can be consciously adopted once you can see them clearly. Right now, most of them are invisible to you because you have been told to look at behavior instead of character. The first trait is a stable relationship with delayed feedback. Most people need confirmation quickly. You do a thing, you want to know it worked. Millionaires, broadly speaking, are comfortable with long gaps between action and result. They do not need the market to move this week to feel certain their investment was right. They do not need the business to profit this quarter to believe the model is sound. That comfort with delay is not patience as a virtue. It is identity-level certainty. They know who they are, so they do not need the money to confirm it constantly. The second trait is the ability to hold financial tension without collapsing it too soon. When you have a decision in front of you, a choice between spending now and saving for something larger later, there is a tension that lives in your body. Most people collapse that tension as fast as possible. Discomfort is a signal they have been trained to resolve immediately. Wealthy psychology people let that tension sit. They do not collapse it into the easiest available option. They let it inform a better one. Does that feel familiar in a place you wish it did not? The third trait is a consistent internal narrative about cause. When something goes wrong financially, what story do you tell? If that story reliably places the cause outside yourself, the economy, the timing, the bad break, you have borrowed a narrative that will keep you financially stuck indefinitely. Not because attitude creates reality in some mystical sense, but because locating cause outside yourself removes your ability to locate the solution inside yourself. Wealth builders narrate failure as information. The story they tell is always about what they now know, not what was done to them. The fourth trait is a specific and recurring relationship with visibility. This one surprises people. Many of the wealthiest individuals across a broad population are not the loudest in the room, but they are consistently visible in one specific way. They are visible to themselves. They track their numbers. They know what came in, what went out, what their net position is, not obsessively but accurately. Most people who are financially behind are financially invisible to themselves. The numbers are vague. The anxiety is specific. That inversion is not a coincidence. The fifth trait is perhaps the most important one, and the one most likely to make you uncomfortable. It is the willingness to hold a self-image that has not yet been confirmed by circumstance. Right now, your bank account, your job title, your neighborhood, your last purchase, these things are feeding you information about who you are, and you are mostly accepting that information as true. Wealth-building psychology does the opposite. It holds an identity that precedes the evidence, not as delusion, not as self-flattery, but as a working premise that shapes decision-making before the results arrive. Call up the person you were 3 years earlier as it really was. The apartment, the account, the conversations you had about money late at night when you were honest with yourself. Think about what you believed about who you were back then financially. How much of that belief was formed by what you could see rather than what you had decided? How much of your current situation is still being generated by that same process? That is the mirror, right there. Here is the principle this chapter is built on. Millionaires do not think about money differently than you do. They think about themselves differently. And the money is a side effect. Every financial habit, every investment decision, every moment of restraint or bold action, these are downstream from identity. You cannot budget your way to a different identity. You cannot hustle your way there either. You change the thermostat, or the temperature stays the same no matter how hard the furnace runs. Renata did not get a new salary. She got a new self-image that her salary had to catch up to. The mirror you look at every morning is showing you the identity currently running your financial life. That identity was not chosen. It was inherited, reinforced, and silently confirmed by every money experience you have had since childhood. Because it was built without your conscious input, most people assume it is fixed. It is not. The mirror can be reset, not through affirmations and not through effort, through something more precise than either. What exactly does that reprogramming require? And why do so many people attempt it and fail? Chapter 3. Your thermostat is set to comfort, not wealth. Reprogramming almost always fails because people target the wrong thing. That sounds harsh. And if you have spent real time trying to change your financial life, it might even feel unfair. But stay with it. The people who fail at reprogramming are not failing due to laziness or poor information or bad luck. They are failing because they are trying to rewrite their behavior while leaving their identity completely intact. And identity, it turns out, is the thermostat. Everything else is just room temperature. Here is the question that will follow you through this entire chapter. It is a question you probably cannot answer right now, which is exactly why it matters. The question is this: if someone handed you $200,000 tomorrow morning, where would that money be in 5 years? Not where you hope it would be, not where your intentions would aim it. Where would it actually land given who you currently are? Hold that question. The answer is coming. And when it arrives, it will not be comfortable. Think about 𝗜𝗠𝗣𝗧𝗘. 𝗜𝗠𝗣𝗧𝗘 was 31 years old when she won a state lottery jackpot. Not one of those headline-grabbing 9-figure payouts, but a real number. After taxes, she received $412,000. She had been working as a medical receptionist in a mid-sized city, renting a 2-bedroom apartment and carrying about $19,000 in credit card debt. By any standard measure, her financial life was ordinary. And then, overnight, it was not. What 𝗜𝗠𝗣𝗧𝗘 did next was, by her own account, careful. She paid off the debt immediately. She bought a modest house instead of renting. She kept her job for another 8 months before leaving. She did not buy a sports car. She did not send money to distant cousins she barely knew. She set aside an investment account and told herself she would not touch it. By most definitions, she behaved responsibly. 5 years later, 𝗜𝗠𝗣𝗧𝗘's net worth sat at roughly $40,000. The house had been sold after a dispute with a neighbor led to an expensive renovation she had not planned. That led to a second loan, which led to a decision to just sell and go back to renting. The investment account had been drawn down gradually, each withdrawal justified by something that felt reasonable at the time. A family emergency here, a career change there, a period of unemployment that lasted longer than expected. No single decision looked reckless in isolation. That is what makes 𝗜𝗠𝗣𝗧𝗘's story so difficult to dismiss. She never made the obvious mistake. She never gambled it away. She never fell for a scam. And yet the money left. It did not leave because of bad luck. It left because 𝗜𝗠𝗣𝗧𝗘's financial identity had a set point. And the set point was not $400,000. The set point was the life she had been living before the check arrived. This is what the thermostat model describes. Every person carries an internal financial identity, a psychological baseline that feels like normal. When your actual financial state rises above that baseline, something inside you begins generating pressure to return. Not dramatically, not obviously, just quietly, consistently, through 1,000 small decisions that each feel perfectly reasonable at the time. A little more spending here because you can afford it. A little less urgency about earning there because the cushion exists. A slightly lower tolerance for discomfort because the crisis feels further away. And when your financial state drops below the baseline, the thermostat pushes back the other direction. You hustle harder. You cut expenses. You feel the urgency return. You claw your way back to the set point. This is why the 𝗓𝗛𝗡𝗧𝗘 frame is so seductive and so dangerous. It tells you that wealth is something that happens to you, something you earn or receive or stumble into. If you believe that, the thermostat never comes into focus. You keep working harder, waiting for circumstances to align, not realizing that the ceiling you keep hitting is built into your own sense of who you are. Bring to mind the person you were 3 years earlier as it really was, not in terms of income or saving specifically, but in terms of how you felt about money, the level of financial anxiety you carried, the number you privately considered enough to feel stable, the kind of lifestyle that felt like yours. Now ask yourself honestly how different that is from where you stand today. For most people in their 20s and early 30s, the number has changed. The feeling has not. The thermostat has held its setting even as the external world kept moving. That is the recognition that stings a little, and it should, because it means the problem is not your income. It is not your savings rate. It is not even your financial literacy, though that matters too. The root problem is that your identity has a ceiling your current self considers comfortable. And comfort is the enemy of wealth in a very specific way. Not because comfort is bad, but because the thermostat is set to maintain it. The moment you earn or receive more than your set point can hold, the system starts leaking money back out until the temperature feels right again. In a later section, we will get to a point about motivation that breaks with the story most people inherited. After that really registers, it immediately changes how you decide to spend the next decade. But first, you need to understand what the thermostat is actually made of. It is not made of habits exactly. Habits are downstream of it. It is made of identity statements, the deep and mostly unconscious answers to questions like, what kind of person am I? What does someone like me earn? What would feel excessive for a person in my position? These answers were installed early. Some came from watching your parents handle money. Some came from the neighborhood you grew up in, the school you attended, the conversations about money you overheard before you were old enough to evaluate them critically. And here is what makes identity statements so powerful. They do not feel like beliefs. They feel like facts. You do not think, I believe I am the kind of person who earns $45,000 a year. You just feel at a gut level that anything significantly above that is temporary, or lucky, or belongs to a different category of person than you. A man named Darius learned this the hard way. He was a freelance graphic designer, talented, reliable, building his client base steadily. One year, through a combination of one major corporate contract and several smaller wins, he earned nearly 3 times his previous annual income. He did not change his lifestyle dramatically. He was careful, but by the following March, his savings from that big year were nearly gone and his work pipeline had quietly dried up. When he looked back, he could not point to waste. He had just stopped hunting. The pressure that had driven him to hustle had been relieved by the cushion. Without the pressure, the urgency had dissolved. His thermostat had done its job. The thermostat does not care about your goals. It cares about your identity. And your identity right now is calibrated to a specific financial temperature that probably feels both slightly uncomfortable and deeply familiar. This is where hope enters, and it enters quietly. Because the thermostat is not permanent. It was set, which means it can be reset, not by wanting more, not by repeating phrases about wealth until they feel true, not by building new habits over the same old identity. The reset happens only when the identity itself changes, when the deep, quiet answer to the question, what kind of person am I, shifts to include a new financial ceiling as its baseline rather than its aspiration. This is the difference between a person who earns $1 million and a millionaire. The person who earns $1 million has had a good financial event. The millionaire has a thermostat set at a different temperature. When that person's money drops, they feel the same low-grade alarm you feel when your bank account dips past the line that triggers anxiety. They feel it because their identity is calibrated at that higher floor. Wealth is not accumulated. It is maintained by identity. This is the thing people miss when they look at wealthy individuals and try to reverse engineer their strategies. The strategies are real, but they are downstream. The strategies persist because the identity sustains them. 𝗓𝗓𝗓 did not fail to maintain her wealth because she lacked knowledge. She failed because her identity had not expanded to include the new floor. So the thermostat ran its program, and the temperature returned to normal. Now here is where the open loop closes. You held a question at the beginning of this chapter. Where would $200,000 actually be in 5 years, given who you currently are? Not who you intend to be. Not the disciplined version of yourself you keep promising to become on the 1st of next month. You as you actually are with your current thermostat setting. If your honest answer is that the money would probably be mostly gone, through spending that seemed justified, through missed investment consistency, through the quiet dissolution of urgency once the pressure lifted, then you are not broken. You are just calibrated to a set point that has not been moved yet. And that is the sentence you need to sit with. Not yet. Because every chapter of this book is a degree on that dial. Not a strategy. Not a habit. A degree. A small, deliberate expansion of what your identity considers normal, permanent, and yours. The mirror you first saw in the opening of this book, the one that showed you your current self, is now showing you something else. If you look carefully, you can just begin to make out a different reflection looking back. It does not look like a luckier version of you. It looks like a more settled one. Someone for whom the wealth is not exciting because it is not new. It is just the temperature they keep the room. What would you have to believe about yourself, at the level of identity, for that temperature to feel like yours? Chapter 4. Millionaires do not manage money, they manage identity. Something is draining away from you in the background, and it is not dramatic enough to feel like a crisis. That is the problem. Every week you spend operating from the same psychological blueprint, the same internal limits, the same quiet assumptions about what is realistic for you, the same reflexes around money, is a week that compounds against you. Not against your bank balance, against your identity. The gap between where you are and where you want to be is not primarily a financial gap. It is a psychological one, and psychological gaps do not stay the same size while you wait. They widen. The invisible mechanism is this. The longer an identity runs unchanged, the more evidence it collects to prove itself correct. You do not just stay stuck, you become more convincingly stuck. And here is what nobody tells you about that process. It is not your fault. You were handed a psychological blueprint before you were old enough to question it. But once you can see that blueprint clearly, everything changes. What you are about to hear is not a list of habits. It is a structural map of a different kind of mind. That question from the last chapter is still sitting there. What would you have to believe about yourself at the level of identity for a certain temperature of wealth to feel like yours? That is not a motivational question. It is a mechanical one, because the answer reveals exactly which psychological traits you currently have and which ones you do not. Those traits are not fixed, but you cannot change what you have not yet named. So name them one by one. The first trait is how you relate to risk, not financial risk in the abstract, but risk as a personal experience, something your body and mind process in real time. Here is the lived version of that when someone actually does it. You are offered an opportunity. Maybe it is a business idea, a side income stream, a chance to negotiate for more money at work, something with uncertain outcomes. Your mind immediately does one of two things. It calculates the cost of losing, or it calculates the cost of not trying. Most people calculate the cost of losing. A millionaire's mind calculates the cost of not trying. This is not recklessness. A millionaire is not indifferent to risk. They feel it, but their psychological starting point is different. The standard relationship with risk is rooted in protection. You protect what you have. The millionaire's relationship with risk is rooted in probability. Every uncertain situation is a set of possible outcomes. The question is whether the distribution of those outcomes tilts far enough in a useful direction to justify entry. That is not bravery. It is a different question being asked at the moment of decision. Consider a man named Raymond. He worked as a site coordinator for a mid-sized logistics company. For 3 years, he had been quietly building a client roster on the side, offering the same coordination services independently on weekends. He had 40 clients. He had proof. He had income. But he held onto his salaried job with both hands because leaving felt like losing something guaranteed. His wife asked him once what he was afraid of, and he said, losing the safety net. What he could not see was that the safety net had become the ceiling. His income on the side had already matched his salary. But psychologically, the job felt like a possession, and the business felt like a gamble. He was calculating the cost of losing the job, not the cost of staying in it. It took a company restructure that eliminated his position for him to find out that the floor he had been protecting was not as solid as he believed. Within 6 months of working his business full-time, his income was double what the salary had been. Raymond was not reckless before the restructure. He was not stupid. He was simply asking the wrong question, the question his identity had been trained to ask. That is the first gap, the risk question. The second trait is time horizon, and this one cuts deeper than most people expect. Think about a decision you made with money in the last 90 days. A purchase, a subscription, something you chose not to invest in, something you chose to spend on instead. Now ask yourself, what was the time frame your mind was operating inside when you made that decision? A week? A month? The end of the year? Here is the truth most people do not sit with long enough. The standard psychological time horizon for financial decisions is the next pay cycle, not even consciously, just automatically. The mind asks, will I have enough for this month, and then stops. A millionaire's time horizon begins at 3 years and stretches outward from there. 3 years is considered the near future. That is not a financial planning trick. It is an identity structure. It means that when a millionaire evaluates an opportunity, the question they are asking is not whether it helps them this month. The question is whether it builds something with compounding value over the following 5 or 10 years. These two minds, looking at the exact same dollar amount, are evaluating entirely different objects. Before long, we will get to a point about patience in wealth building that breaks with the story most people inherited. Once that becomes real to you, it immediately changes how you act. But for now, sit with this. Your current financial decisions are being made inside a time frame that was handed to you by your circumstances, not chosen by your identity. If money has always been tight enough that the next pay cycle mattered enormously, your mind learned to keep the window small as a survival mechanism. That was intelligent. It kept you present and functional. But a survival-length time horizon cannot build decade-length wealth. Not because of math, because of identity. The decisions that compound do not feel urgent. They require a mind willing to act on something that will not pay off for years, and a mind shaped around this month's rent has no framework for valuing that kind of action. Yet, the third trait is where things get uncomfortable. Self-worth independence. This is the trait least talked about in financial spaces, and it might be the one that matters most. Your level of self-worth should not fluctuate with your net worth. That sounds obvious when stated plainly. But watch what actually happens in your life. When you have a strong financial month, how do you carry yourself? When you have a bad one, does something in your posture, your conversations, your willingness to speak up in rooms shift downward? For most people, the answer is yes. And they have never noticed it because the correlation feels so natural. Money up, confidence up. Money down, confidence down. The internal thermostat rises and falls with the bank balance. A millionaire's self-worth does not work this way. Not because millionaires are immune to financial stress. Because their psychological identity was formed separately from their account balance. They developed a sense of who they are that is not contingent on external financial confirmation. And this matters mechanically. When self-worth is tied to current wealth, any decision that risks current wealth also risks the self. The ego and the bank account become the same object. Protecting money becomes protecting identity. And protecting identity is primal. You will always prioritize it over rational financial strategy. Go back to the person you were 3 years earlier as it really was. Not just financially, but in how you thought about yourself in relation to money. Did you feel like someone who money happened to, or someone who moved money around intentionally? Most people, honestly sitting with that question, land somewhere closer to the first answer. Not because they lacked intelligence or effort, because the psychological connection between their self-image and their account balance was too tight. When the balance dropped, so did the sense of possibility. That is the thermostat dropping, and a thermostat that drops with difficulty will never stay at a higher temperature long enough for it to feel like home. The fourth trait is how you relate to loss, not the fear of loss, which is universal, the interpretation of loss once it has already occurred. Here is the practical contrast. A standard psychological response to financial loss is confirmation. The loss confirms the fear that was already there. The mind says, I knew this was risky, I should have been more careful. This is what happens when I step outside what I know. Loss becomes evidence. Evidence becomes identity. And the identity contracts to avoid more loss, which means it also avoids more opportunity. A millionaire's psychological response to financial loss is different in one precise way. Loss is data, not verdict. A bad investment, a failed venture, a quarter that did not perform, these are inputs that update the strategy. They do not update the self-concept. The millionaire does not feel that the loss is information about who they are. It is information about what happened. That distinction is not trivial. It is the entire game. Because if loss is a verdict on your worth, you will stop exposing yourself to situations where loss is possible. And wealth building is inherently a domain of possible loss. You cannot have one without tolerating the other. Each of these traits, risk orientation, time horizon, self-worth independence, loss relationship, is not a financial skill. You cannot acquire them in a money management course. They are not strategies. They are the psychological infrastructure that financial strategies run on top of. Every specific thing a millionaire does with money, the investments they make, the offers they take, the rooms they choose to walk into, the conversations they initiate about compensation, is downstream of these four traits. The behavior is the output. The identity is the system. This is why two people can read the same financial book and apply entirely different strategies from it. They did not read different words. They processed those words through different identities. One mind found confirmation for what it already believed. The other found tools it was already built to use. The gap is not between what you know and what they know. The gap is between who you are and who they are at the level of psychological structure. And structure can be rebuilt, not through inspiration, but through precise, deliberate work on exactly the 4 places named in this chapter. Which of these 4 traits feels most foreign to the version of you that operates day to day? Chapter 5. The trait you were told was arrogance. Knowing your own worth is not arrogance. That sounds like something written on a motivational poster, soft and easy to dismiss. But here is what most people miss. The belief that your value does not depend on anyone else's opinion of you, that your worth is not up for negotiation, that you do not owe the world an apology for taking up space and wanting more. That precise belief is the single psychological trait most responsible for sustained wealth. And you were probably told in ways direct and indirect that having it made you selfish. That framing cost you more than you know. This chapter is going to show you exactly how much. That question from the last chapter, which of those 4 traits feels most foreign to you? Stay with it for a moment. What you are about to encounter is likely the deepest answer. You might have thought the foreign trait was decisiveness, or risk tolerance, or long-term thinking. Those matter. But underneath all of them, holding them up or pulling them down, is something older and quieter. It is the story you carry about how much you deserve. Here is the open loop you need to hold as you move through this chapter. There is a woman named Alina. You will meet her soon. She did everything right on paper. She worked hard, she saved when she could, she followed every piece of advice she was given, and she stayed stuck. The reason she stayed stuck is not what you expect. Hold that. First, you need to understand where low self-worth came from, not in a therapeutic excavate your childhood way. In a practical name the source way. Because once you name it, you stop treating it as truth. Think about the specific messages you absorbed before you were old enough to question them. Be grateful for what you have. Do not act like you are better than anyone else. Money does not grow on trees, so stop asking. Who do you think you are? That last one is worth sitting with. Not as a question, as an accusation. Who do you think you are? It was aimed at ambition. It was aimed at wanting. It was aimed at the part of you that looked at a different life and said, quietly, I could have that. You were taught that wanting more was ingratitude. You were taught that confidence was a performance for people who had not yet been humbled. You were taught in 100 small ways that shrinking yourself was a virtue called humility, and that anyone who did not shrink was showing off. The problem is that the wealthy did not receive those messages the same way you did. This is not about class in the way people usually mean it. It is not about private schools or inherited money, though those exist. It is about a specific permission slip, the internal belief that your desires are legitimate, that your ideas are worth backing, that your time has a real dollar value, and that you are allowed to say so out loud. Some people received that permission slip early. Most people reading this did not. Now here is what that costs you, not in theory, in behavior. When you do not believe your time is worth much, you undercharge. When you undercharge, you attract clients or employers who confirm you are worth exactly what you charged. When you earn at the level you secretly believe you deserve, your inner thermostat stays right where it was set. Sometimes for years, sometimes for a decade, you work more, you grind harder, and the thermostat does not move, because the thermostat is not set by your effort. It is set by your self-worth. That is the mechanism. That is what this chapter is about. Now meet Alina. Alina was 31 and worked in marketing at a mid-sized firm in a city that cost more to live in each year than it did the year before. She was good at her job. Her manager said so regularly. Her ideas were used in campaigns that won internal awards. She had been passed over for promotion twice, not because her work was poor, but because she had never once asked to be considered. When a colleague, less experienced and newer to the team, received the promotion, 𝗓𝗓𝗓 told herself it was politics. She told herself it was unfair. Both of those things might have been true, but here is what was also true. When her manager had asked her once in a casual hallway conversation where she saw herself in the next few years, 𝗓𝗓𝗓 had said something small, something polite, something that did not inconvenience anyone or suggest she expected anything in particular. She had said she was just happy to be learning. 𝗓𝗓𝗓 spent money in a specific pattern that people with low self-worth often do. She bought things that signaled to others that she was doing fine: a nice bag, dinners she could not quite afford, weekend trips that looked good in photos. Each purchase was a small argument she was making to the world: I am worth something. Look, the tragedy is that it was an argument she had not yet made to herself. She stayed stuck, not because she lacked talent, not because the system did not have a place for her. She stayed stuck because she did not believe, at the level below conscious thought, that she was the kind of person who got to want more and expect to receive it. That is 𝗓𝗓𝗓. Now take a breath. Remember the person you were 3 years earlier as it really was. Not the circumstances, the job, the city, the bank balance. Think about the story you were telling yourself about what you were worth. Think about whether that story has changed, or whether the number in your account has simply changed its clothing while the thermostat stayed where it was. Think about the last time someone asked what you wanted. Think about whether your answer was honest or polite. That is the mirror moment. You do not need to answer it out loud, but you do need to let it land. Here is what makes this hard to talk about. When someone with money demonstrates high self-worth, it reads as confidence. When someone without money demonstrates the exact same trait, it reads as delusion, or arrogance, or being difficult. The same behavior, knowing your value, naming your price, declining to apologize for your ambitions, carries a completely different social cost depending on what your bank account says when you do it. This creates a trap. You are asked to develop the psychological traits of wealth before wealth confirms that you have permission to have them. The world wants proof before it grants you access to the identity. But the identity is what generates the proof. This is why waiting for confidence before you act is a strategy that produces no results. The millionaire's self-worth is not conditional on the outcome. It does not arrive after the good quarter. It does not depend on the client saying yes. It does not need anyone in the room to agree. This is the trait that looks like arrogance from the outside, especially to people who were taught that your worth should be confirmed by your results, your audience, your title, or your income. But conditional self-worth is not actually self-worth at all. It is approval in a costume. The unconditional version, the one that says, I know what I am worth regardless of what this moment confirms, that is the version that makes different decisions. It is the version that holds a price and does not flinch. The version that leaves a room where it is being undervalued. The version that starts the business before anyone has endorsed the idea, because internal endorsement came first. Down the line in this book, we will get to a point about confidence that breaks with the story most people inherited. When that idea snaps into focus, it immediately changes how you act on ordinary days when nothing significant seems to be at stake. For now, understand this. The mechanism works like a thermostat in both directions. Low self-worth pulls money down toward its set point the way a thermostat pulls temperature back to 68 degrees in a cold room. But high, unconditional self-worth does the same thing in reverse. It pulls everything upward, not magically, through behavior. Through the price you name, the opportunities you decline, the rooms you enter without waiting for permission, the negotiations you do not abandon the moment someone pushes back. Every financial decision you make is downstream of a belief about your worth. Every one. Now here is where Alena's story closes. 3 months after the promotion that went to her colleague, Alena left. Not in a dramatic way. She spent those 3 months documenting her results, the campaigns, the numbers, the outcomes that had her fingerprints on them. She approached 2 other firms with a specific role and a specific salary in mind. The salary was higher than anything she had been paid before. She did not apologize for the number. She felt the pull to soften it, to frame it as negotiable before they even pushed back, to make it easier for them to say yes by making it smaller. She did not give in to that pull. One firm declined. One firm accepted. Alena was not a different person with different talent. She had the same skills she had the year before. What changed was narrower than people expect. She made a specific decision to stop treating her worth as something the market calculated and she received. She made it something she stated first, and the market responded to. That is the principle in one place. Your worth is not discovered. It is declared. The question that follows is the one the next chapter will answer. If high self-worth is the trait and declaring your worth is the act, then why do so many people who believe they are worth more still fail to build wealth? There is a gap between the belief and the outcome, and it has a specific name. Chapter 6. How millionaires lose without losing themselves. Something is draining out of your financial life right now, and it is not your bank account. The account is just where you see the symptom. What is actually depleting is something quieter and more costly. It is the recoverable time you are spending inside a version of yourself that does not yet know how to absorb a loss and keep moving. Every financial setback carries a second price tag. The first price is the money itself. The second price is the weeks, sometimes months, you spend restructuring your identity around the loss instead of past it. That second price is the one most people never calculate. And because it goes uncounted, it compounds invisibly. The distance between where you are and where you want to be financially is not primarily a distance of dollars. It is a distance of recovery time. What this chapter is going to show you is exactly what closes that distance. Not a strategy, not a formula, a specific psychological structure that the people who rebuild fastest all share. You already know the gap has a name. The previous chapter left you with that thread. High self-worth can coexist with low wealth. Believing you deserve more does not automatically produce more. Something sits between the belief and the result, and that something is what you are about to meet directly. Here is where the open loop begins. There is a question that almost nobody asks after a financial loss, and it is the only question that actually matters. You will hear it before this chapter ends. But first, you need to see what loss really looks like from the inside and why 2 people can experience the exact same financial hit and walk away with completely different futures. Picture 2 people. Both are 31 years old. Both are pulling in good income. Both have built something they are proud of. And then both of them lose it or most of it inside the same bad quarter. A bad deal, a failed venture, money that simply does not come back. The external circumstances are nearly identical. What happens next is where everything separates. The first person is named Marcus. Marcus spent 4 years building a small import business. He sourced well, he worked relentlessly, he made real money. Then a supplier collapsed, a shipment was lost, and a client dispute wiped out the cash reserve he had been treating as a personal achievement. He lost about $60,000 over 6 months. Not ruinous, recoverable, but something broke in Marcus that the money alone cannot explain. He stopped returning calls. He started explaining the loss to anyone who would listen, not to process it, but to prove it was not his fault. He turned down 2 new opportunities in the following year because, as he put it, he could not afford to be wrong again. Marcus did not lose $60,000. Marcus lost his sense of himself as someone capable of generating $60,000. And that second loss was the one that cost him the next 3 years. Now sit with that for a moment before we move forward. The second person is named Diane. Diane ran a small consulting practice that collapsed when her 2 anchor clients merged and eliminated their external contracts on the same day. She lost her primary income in a single phone call. By any reasonable measure, her situation was more severe than Marcus's. But here is what Diane did in the 3 days after that call. She did not minimize what had happened. She sat with the loss honestly. She told her husband the full number. She cried once, genuinely. And then she said something to herself that she would later describe as automatic, almost reflexive. She said, "This is not who I am, this is what happened to me." She was back in client conversations within 2 weeks. Not because she had a plan yet, because she had not confused the event with her identity. 1 year later, Diane's revenue had surpassed her previous high. Marcus was still explaining the supplier collapse at dinner parties. What is the difference between them? It is not intelligence. It is not drive. It is not even resilience in the popular sense, meaning the ability to feel terrible and push through anyway. The difference is identity stability under financial pressure. Diane had it. Marcus did not. And this is the precise mechanism that separates the people who accumulate wealth over time from the people who earn well but cannot hold it. Look back at your ordinary days 3 years earlier, as it really was. Think about a financial loss you experienced, maybe a job, a venture, a relationship that cost you money when it ended. When you think about that loss now, what is the first thing that moves in you? If it is the memory of the money, that is one thing. But if what moves first is a residue of embarrassment, a sense that the loss said something true about you, then you are carrying something Marcus carried. And it is worth understanding what that cost you in the years since. The inner thermostat concept from earlier in this book becomes most visible in this moment. A thermostat does not panic when the temperature drops. It registers the change and begins the correction. The question is not whether it feels the cold. The question is whether its core function, its identity as a temperature regulator, survives the drop. If the thermostat lost faith in itself every time the room got cold, you would never have a warm house. You would have a device that works only when conditions are already favorable. This is the structure inside Diane that Marcus was missing. Her financial self-concept was not a scoreboard. It was a property of her character. And properties of character do not reset to 0 because 1 quarter went badly. Here is something worth sitting with. Most people believe that financial resilience comes from experience, specifically from surviving enough losses that the losses stop hurting so much. That belief is understandable, but it is wrong. Experience alone does not build identity stability. You can lose money 20 times and still lose yourself every time. What builds identity stability is something different. It is the prior decision, conscious or not, about where your financial identity lies. Does it live in the outcome or does it live in the capacity? When your financial identity lives in outcomes, every loss is an identity event. When it lives in capacity, A loss is an information event. The money went. The capability that generated the money did not. A little later, we arrive at an argument about confidence, specifically about where financial confidence actually comes from that breaks with the story most people inherited. And once you see it, the contradiction resolves in a way that changes how you make decisions under uncertainty. For now, come back to Marcus and Diane. There is one more layer here that is easy to miss. Marcus is not weak. This is important. Marcus is a person who attached his identity to the outcome because that is what the culture around him taught. He grew up watching success celebrated as a character trait, which means by inversion that failure becomes a character indictment. When you absorb that frame deeply enough, losing money does not feel like losing a resource. It feels like exposure. It feels like the world now knows something about you that you had managed to conceal. From that internal state, pulling back is not irrational. It is self-protective. Marcus was protecting something real. He just did not realize the thing he was protecting was the wrong asset. Diane was not immune to that same cultural programming. What made her different was not that she escaped it. It was that, somewhere in her earlier years, she had developed a working separation between her worth as a person and her results in a given period. She had built, without ever naming it, what this book calls wealth as personality rather than portfolio. Her financial identity did not sit in what the account said. It sat in what she knew herself capable of doing again. This separation is not arrogance. It is precision. Arrogance would be refusing to look at the loss honestly. What Diane had was something more useful than arrogance. It was a clean distinction between information and verdict. The loss was information. It told her something about the client acquisition strategy she had relied on too heavily. It told her something about concentration risk. She used that information. She did not use it as a referendum on whether she deserved to be in business at all. This is the point the chapter has been setting up since the opening minutes. Wealth resilience is not emotional indifference to loss. It is not the absence of pain. It is identity stability while circumstances fluctuate. The millionaire who has lost and rebuilt, and most of them have, does not feel nothing when the money goes. They feel the loss fully. What they do not feel is that the loss has changed who they fundamentally are and therefore changed what they are capable of producing next. Now here is the question almost nobody asks after a financial loss, the one left open at the start of this chapter. Not how did this happen? Not what did I do wrong? Those questions have their place. But the question that actually determines your financial future after a loss is this one. Did I just lose money, or did I lose the version of myself who makes money? That question is not rhetorical. It has a real answer, and the answer is different for different people in different losses. The practice of asking it honestly, without softening it, is the practice of locating where your financial identity actually lives. And once you know where it lives, you can begin to choose its address more deliberately. Marcus never asked that question. He let the loss answer it for him by default, and the default answer was devastating. Diane did not ask it consciously either. She had simply built a habit of mind, over years, that had already placed her financial identity somewhere the loss could not reach. You can build that same placement deliberately. That is the work, and it does not begin with a better strategy or a bolder investment. It begins with the same internal separation Diane had between what happened and who you are. Losing money without losing yourself is not a gift some people are born with. It is a decision about where you keep the self. Chapter 7. Closing the gap is an inside measurement. Deciding where you keep the self is not a poetic idea. It is a diagnostic one. Most people assume the gap between themselves and a millionaire is a money gap. That sounds obvious. So obvious it feels almost rude to question it. But it is wrong. The gap between where you are and where a millionaire operates is measured in psychological distance, not dollars. That matters because you can close a psychological gap starting right now today, without a raise, without a windfall, without anyone's permission. A money gap requires money to close. A psychological gap requires only accurate self-knowledge and the willingness to act on what you find. That second option is available to you at this moment. The question this chapter answers is not how much further you have to go. The question is how you take an honest measurement so you know exactly what you are working with. And here is what almost no one tells you about that measurement. It has nothing to do with your bank balance. There is a man named Darnell who grew up in a small apartment above a laundromat in Cincinnati. His mother worked the front desk at a dental office. His father drove a delivery truck. Not poor, but not comfortable either. The family treated money the way some families treat a difficult relative. You acknowledged it when it showed up, you worried about it when it didn't, and you never quite trusted it to stay. Darnell grew up smart and disciplined. By 28, he had a stable job in logistics management, a modest savings account, and a specific, persistent feeling that he was always one emergency away from starting over. He earned enough. He did not feel like someone who earned enough. That distance between what his statement said and what his nervous system believed was the real measurement. That was his gap, not the number. The nervous systems report on the number. Most people who feel behind financially have a version of Darnell's gap. The account says one thing, the body says another. Rewind to your money picture 3 years earlier and look only at the money side. Not the specifics, just the feeling. Was the feeling different from today? Has the number changed more than the feeling has? If so, you already know something important about yourself. Your financial identity has not kept pace with your financial reality. That is not a character flaw. It is a calibration problem, and calibration problems have solutions. So here is how the measurement works. There are 5 scenarios. As you hear each one, your only job is to notice your first internal response, not the response you think you should have. The first one. That first flicker before the reasoning starts is the data. Scenario 1. Someone hands you a check for $50,000, no strings attached, a gift from a distant relative you barely knew. What happens inside you first? Not what you would do with it. What happens in the first 3 seconds before any plan forms? Some people feel relief. Some feel excitement. Some feel, almost immediately, a quiet dread. A certainty that something will go wrong with it, that it will disappear, that they do not deserve to hold that much at once. That dread is a gap dimension. It means your identity thermostat is set below the level of that number. The money arrives and the thermostat reads it as a threat rather than a confirmation. Notice what you felt. Do not judge it, just hold it. Scenario 2. You are in a room with 6 people, all of them wealthier than you. Not celebrities, not famous, just people whose net worth is several times yours. They are having a relaxed conversation about a business opportunity. Someone turns and asks your opinion. What is the first thing you feel? Confidence or a quiet background sense that you are about to be exposed as someone who does not belong there? That feeling, if it arrives, is another gap dimension. It is your identity placing you outside a circle you have not yet claimed membership in. Here is the thing about that feeling. Millionaires felt it too. The difference is not that they never felt it. The difference is where they placed it. Scenario 3. You make a financial mistake. Not catastrophic, but real. You trusted someone you should not have, Or you pulled money from an investment too early and it cost you. What is your first move internally? Some people feel shame and retract. They get smaller and quieter about money for weeks. They tell themselves a story that confirms they are bad with money. Others feel the sting but move quickly to analysis. What happened? Why did it happen? What changes next time? These are not personality types. These are gap positions. One response treats the mistake as evidence. The other treats it as information. Evidence confirms an identity. Information updates a strategy. Now you see the difference. Scenario 4. You are offered a salary significantly higher than you currently make. Not a fantasy number, just a real jump, the kind that would change your daily options in concrete ways. Someone who values your skills makes you a serious, credible offer. What is your first internal movement? Do you feel you have earned it and accept your own worthiness without negotiation in your head? Or does a quieter voice surface immediately with doubt? Maybe they made a mistake. Maybe they will realize later it is too much. Maybe you should not ask for more in case the offer disappears entirely. That second set of voices is not humility. It is a ceiling. And ceilings are not fixed structures. They are beliefs that have been repeated long enough to feel architectural. Scenario 5. You tell someone close to you, someone whose opinion you care about, that you intend to be wealthy. Not famous, not extraordinary in any exotic way, just genuinely, deliberately wealthy. What do you feel in the moment before they respond? Not what you think they will say. What do you feel about saying it out loud? Do you feel the statement as true as a simple declaration of direction? Or does it feel slightly embarrassing, slightly arrogant, slightly like you are claiming a seat you have not yet been assigned? That feeling in the gap between saying the thing and believing the thing is what this chapter is designed to help you close. 5 scenarios, 5 gap dimensions: recognition, belonging, resilience, worthiness, and declaration. And none of them are measured by your bank balance. This is the open question this chapter began building toward. If the gap is not financial, what closes it? The answer is not willpower, and it is not effort. You have probably already applied significant amounts of both. The answer is identity revision. And identity revision begins with a measurement accurate enough to act on. Here is what accurate means in this context. Most people, when they try to evaluate their relationship with money, do so retrospectively. They look at decisions they made and try to understand them. That process is useful but incomplete. The mind is very good at constructing reasonable explanations for past behavior. The real signal is perspective. It lives in the first response to a future scenario, before the reasoning engine engages. That first response is your current identity speaking plainly. It tells you where your thermostat is set. And once you know where the thermostat is set, you can begin the process of resetting it with precision rather than hope. Darnell eventually understood this about himself. He was not bad with money. He was operating inside an identity that treated money as volatile, as something that came and went regardless of what you did, because that was the story the house above the laundromat told every month. He had inherited a thermostat set to scarcity, not because he was weak or unaware, but because the setting had been calibrated by years of lived experience before he had any say in the matter. The moment he understood that the setting was not the truth, just the current setting, everything reoriented. He did not need more information about investing. He did not need a better paying job first. He needed to revise the identity that was running every financial decision he made beneath the level of conscious choice. That is where wealth actually lives, not in a portfolio, in a personality. More precisely, in the part of personality that has been trained to respond to financial reality in a particular way. Further on, we arrive at an argument about how to build confidence around money that breaks with the story most people inherited. Once that lands, it changes how you act when the stakes are highest. But for now, sit with what your 5 responses revealed. Each one pointed to a place where your identity and your desired financial reality are not yet aligned. That misalignment is not a failure. It is a coordinate. It tells you exactly where to work. It is the most honest financial document you have ever read about yourself. And it did not require a spreadsheet, an accountant, or a conversation with anyone except the part of you that answers before the performance begins. The gap is always an inside measurement, not because the outside does not matter, but because the outside is always reading from the inside first. Darnell figured that out in a room above a laundromat in Cincinnati. You just measured yours. The only question left is whether you are willing to close the distance between the person who answered those 5 questions and the person you already know you are capable of becoming. Chapter 8. Rehearsing the self you have not earned yet. Something is leaking out of your life right now, and it is not dramatic enough to see on any single day. It is not a crisis. It is not a loss you can point to and name. It is the quiet, compounding cost of living inside an identity that is slightly too small for the life you are trying to build. Every decision you made this week was filtered through a self-image formed years before you had any real information about what you were capable of. Every price you accepted, every offer you hesitated on, every room you walked into slightly unsure of your right to be there, those are not random moments. They are the same moment, repeating. The cost is not just today's missed opportunity. It is what that opportunity would have opened. It is the next door and the one after that. The mechanism causing all of it is invisible. That is exactly why nobody told you about it. But by the time this chapter is done, you will see it clearly. That closing question from the last chapter is still sitting in the room with you. Whether you are willing to close the distance between who answered those 5 questions and who you already know you can become. Hold that question, because this chapter is not about wanting the answer. It is about becoming the kind of person who makes it inevitable. Here is something that will sound strange at first. The person you are trying to become financially is not waiting for money to arrive so they can finally feel like themselves. They already feel like themselves. That is precisely why the money eventually arrives. Read that again slowly in your mind. Most people have this process completely reversed. They believe that once the income goes up, once the account has a certain number in it, once the external evidence is undeniable, then they will start carrying themselves differently. Then they will stop second-guessing. Then they will feel like someone who belongs in certain conversations, at certain tables, in certain rooms. But that is not how the psychology works. That is not how it has ever worked. Waiting for the financial result to give you permission to inhabit the identity is like waiting for a fire to light itself before you strike the match. The identity comes first, every time. Return to your ordinary days 3 years earlier as it really was. Not just financially. Think about how you thought about money. Think about the ceiling you had in your head, the number that felt like enough, the amount that felt like too much to even realistically picture. That ceiling was not based on your actual capacity. It was based on the self-image you were carrying at the time. And the decisions you made from inside that self-image shaped exactly the 3 years that followed. This is the mirror that was introduced early in this book, the one that shows you not your face but your assumptions. 3 years ago, who was looking back at you from that mirror? And who is looking back right now? Here is the open loop this chapter will carry. If identity truly precedes financial outcome, then there must be a specific mechanism by which that works. A practical way that living inside a different self-image actually changes the decisions you make, and the results those decisions produce. That mechanism is real. It is not mystical, and you will see exactly how it operates before this chapter closes. But first, you need to hear about 𝗓𝗓𝗓 again. Not the 𝗓𝗓𝗓 from earlier in this book, the one who received the sudden windfall and watched it dissolve because her thermostat had not changed. This time, imagine a different version of that story. A version where 𝗓𝗓𝗓 made one different decision 18 months before the money arrived. 𝗓𝗓𝗓 was 31. She was earning a predictable salary at a mid-sized logistics company, and she had been at the same pay grade for 2 years. She was competent, reliable, and quietly invisible to the people who made decisions about who moved upward. One Tuesday evening she sat at her kitchen table and did something she had never done before. She wrote in a plain notebook a single paragraph describing who she would be when her financial life had completely changed. Not what she would own, not what she would buy. She wrote how that version of herself thought about a problem at work, how that version walked into a room where she did not yet know anyone, what that version said when someone asked about her professional direction. She wrote it in present tense, as if reporting a fact. She did not share this with anyone. She did not post it anywhere or turn it into a routine she could perform for an audience. She just read it to herself every morning before she left for work. 30 seconds, sometimes less. And slowly, over weeks that felt unremarkable from the outside, something started shifting in the small decisions. She started speaking in meetings the way the paragraph described. She started pricing her skills the way that version of herself would price them. She asked for a meeting with her director that the old version of 𝗓𝗓𝗓 would have postponed for another 6 months, maybe a year. She got a raise, not a life-changing number, just a raise. But it was the first raise she had ever initiated. 14 months later, she was in a different company at a different level, and the income gap between her and that version in the notebook was closing fast. Here is the thing about 𝗓𝗓𝗓's story that matters most. The notebook did not predict the future. It did not summon anything. What it did was far more practical. It gave her a behavioral template to run inside a specific identity before that identity had been confirmed by evidence. She was not pretending to be successful. She was practicing the exact decision-making patterns of the version of herself that was financially stable, confident about her value, and clear about her direction. And practice, done consistently, does not stay practice. It becomes default. This is the rehearsal protocol. It is not visualization in the way most people think about visualization, where you sit quietly and picture a beach house and wait for the universe to respond. It is behavioral rehearsal. It is asking with genuine specificity how the target version of you would handle this exact situation, this conversation, this price, this opportunity, this fear, and then doing that imperfectly and incrementally before the financial confirmation exists. The inner thermostat shifts through repeated exposure to the new setting, not through deciding to change it once. Repetition is the mechanism. Consistent repetition of the thoughts, choices, and behavioral patterns of the identity you are moving into, that is what recalibrates the thermostat. Without that repetition, any money that arrives will feel foreign to your system, and your system will quietly work to return to what feels familiar. You have seen this in this book already. You saw it in 𝗓𝗓𝗓's first story. The windfall returned to the mean because the mean had not changed. Now you understand why. So how do you actually do this? Not in theory. Right now, in your specific life with your specific constraints, you start smaller than feels meaningful, uncomfortably small. The tendency is to rehearse the finished version of the wealthy self all at once, to imagine yourself already at the destination and try to feel it completely. That does not work with any consistency. The gap is too large, and your existing identity is too practiced at identifying the falseness of it. What works is one behavioral layer at a time. Pick one domain where the identity gap is loudest. Maybe it is how you respond when someone offers you less than your work is worth. Maybe it is how long you hold eye contact when discussing money with someone who has more of it than you do. Maybe it is the decision you keep deferring because the current version of you does not feel qualified to make it yet. Pick one domain, just one, and ask yourself with real honesty, how would the version of me who has already closed this gap behave here? Then do that. Once. Imperfectly. Without waiting for confidence to arrive first. Confidence is not the cause. Confidence is what happens after you have enough evidence from your own behavior that the new identity is real. You do not wait for it. You generate it through action, from inside the rehearsal. Here is where the villain of this whole story shows up again, that deeply installed belief that wealth is about effort and luck and circumstance. That belief is not just wrong about what creates wealth. It is also wrong about the timing. It tells you to wait, to work harder first, to earn the identity through suffering and delay. But the people who have actually crossed the line you are trying to cross did not earn the identity after the fact. They held the identity first. And the decisions that identity produced were what generated the outcomes. The work was real. The effort was real. But it was effort filtered through the psychology of someone who had already decided who they were. That is the revelation this chapter has been building toward. Acting from the target identity before the numbers confirm it is not delusion. It is the mechanism. It is the only mechanism that actually works in the direction you want to go. The financial shift is downstream of the identity shift. Always. You cannot get the downstream result while living in the upstream cause. Now close the loop. The practical mechanism is behavioral repetition from inside the new identity before evidence exists to support it. 𝗓𝗓 did not manifest a career change. She practiced the decision-making of a more senior, more valuable version of herself until those decisions became her actual decisions. The results followed the behavior. The behavior followed the identity. And the identity was chosen and practiced deliberately. The mirror in this book has shown you your current self. But by now, if you have been doing the inner work this book has been pointing toward, something in that reflection is already starting to shift. The millionaire looking back at you from the other side of that mirror is not a fantasy. It is a behavioral template. It is someone whose decisions you can start making today in the smallest, most concrete situations available to you right now. Soon, we arrive at an argument about confidence and readiness that breaks with the story most people inherited. When that becomes clear, it changes how you decide when to move. For now, hold this. You do not become and then act. You act and then become. The sequence is not a minor detail. The sequence is everything. Chapter 9. The mirror finally stopped lying to you. Every culture that has ever risen and fallen carried the same story inside it. A story about who deserves wealth and who does not. A story about what kind of person accumulates and what kind of person scrapes. In every era, across every language, the people who ended up with the most were not always the ones who worked the hardest or arrived at the right moment. They were the ones who had already decided, somewhere deep and wordless, what they were. The decision came first. The evidence came second. That pattern is not coincidence. It is the oldest financial principle that almost no one names directly. You are at the part of this book where it gets named. And once you hear it said plainly, the version of yourself you have been carrying around will never feel quite the same again. You do not become and then act. You act and then become. The sequence is not a minor detail. The sequence is everything. And that sequence brings you here to the chapter where the mirror finally tells the truth. Go back to where this book began. There was a mirror. You stood in front of it and you saw yourself clearly, or so you thought. You saw someone who was working hard, trying, maybe falling short. Someone who had dreams but also had doubts. Someone who wanted more but quietly suspected that more might not be meant for them. That image felt honest, raw, real. The kind of reflection you do not argue with because it seems to come from evidence. The bills were real. The account balance was real. The gap between where you were and where you wanted to be was measurable in dollars and months and sleepless nights. Here is what you were never told about that reflection. It was lying to you, not about the circumstances. The bills were real. The gap was real. But the identity the mirror showed you, the person it said you were, that was the distortion. You were not seeing yourself clearly. You were seeing the residue of every story you had been handed since you were young. Stories about who gets ahead and why. Stories about people like you and what people like you can reasonably expect. The mirror was not showing you what was true. It was showing you what you had practiced believing. Picture your ordinary days 3 years earlier as it really was. Not the version of the story you tell at parties. The actual internal weather of that time. What did you assume on a quiet Tuesday with no one watching about how your financial life would look at 40? Did you assume comfort, ease, options? Or did you assume something more like survival, just enough maybe, someday? Sit with that for a moment. Because the answer tells you exactly what your inner thermostat was calibrated to. And your inner thermostat did not run your finances. It was your finances, expressed in behavior before the behavior even happened. Now here is the open loop this chapter will carry for a while. When did the distortion begin? Not the moment you first felt poor. Earlier than that. The answer will come. But first, you need to understand what the mirror is showing you now. Something has been shifting across these chapters, not in your bank account, not yet, or perhaps not fully, but in the image inside the glass. The person looking back at you has been changing in a way that is difficult to articulate but impossible to ignore once you feel it. There is a steadiness there that was not present before. A quality of someone who has already made a decision that cannot be unmade. You may have assumed that feeling would arrive after the money, after the raise, after the investment paid off, after the debt cleared. But the feeling came first. It had to. That is the whole point. Consider a woman named Renata. She had spent 11 years working in the same office building, the same floor, watching the same people get promoted past her. She was competent, she was reliable, she showed up early and left late. But when she looked at the people moving upward, she noticed something that unsettled her. They did not seem to work harder than she did. They seemed to expect different things than she did. Small expectations, daily ones. The way they spoke about money in casual conversation, as if it were something that simply arranged itself around them rather than something to be chased. Renata started paying attention to her own quiet assumptions. She realized she spent significant mental energy every week preparing herself for disappointment, bracing for the raise that would not come, the recognition that would be given to someone else. She was rehearsing the wrong outcome, not because she was weak, because no one had ever told her that rehearsal was a choice. She stopped bracing. She started expecting in small and specific ways. Within 14 months, she had changed industries, doubled her salary, and started a side business she had been postponing for 6 years. The money did not change first. Her relationship to what she deserved changed first. The money followed the person, not the other way around. Now close that loop. When did the distortion begin? It began the moment someone you trusted, probably without meaning harm, taught you that wealth required conditions you did not possess. The right connections, the right education, luck arriving at the right door. You absorbed that lesson the way a child absorbs language, not through argument, but through repetition and emotional weight. And once the lesson was installed, your mirror accepted it as the true rendering of who you were. Every experience that confirmed the lesson got remembered. Every experience that contradicted it got explained away. You were not seeing yourself. You were seeing the lesson. The millionaire's reflection that you may have glimpsed in quieter moments. The version of you that was calm about money, decisive about opportunity, unhurried in ambition. That was not a fantasy. That was not wishful thinking dressed up in borrowed clothes. That reflection was the accurate one. The poverty of self-image was the distortion. The limitation was the lie. You did not need to grow into that version of yourself the way you grow into a coat that is 2 sizes too large. That version was already the fit. The lie just told you it wasn't. This is not a comfort handed out freely. It demands something from you. Because if the capable, financially grounded version of you is the real version, then every day you spend performing the distorted one is a day you are choosing, consciously or not, to keep the lie alive. That is not a gentle thought. But gentle thoughts have not been the point of this book. What has been the point is precision. Precision about where the gap lives. Not in your skills, not in your circumstances, not in the particular timing of the economy or the particular coldness of the world. The gap lived in the image, and the image has been correcting itself. Chapter by chapter, principle by principle, the inner thermostat has been recalibrating. Not because you read the right words, but because you stayed with the process long enough for the process to do what it does. Later on, we arrive at an argument about motivation that breaks with the story most people inherited. After that clicks, it changes how you begin every morning. But for now, stay with the mirror. Stand in front of it, not the one in your bathroom. The one in your chest, the one that has been running a quiet slideshow of who you are every day since you were old enough to want things. What does it show you now? Is the image the same as the one from the beginning of this book? If you have been paying attention, it is not. The millionaire in the mirror was never a future version of you. It was always the true version. The one the distortion spent years covering over. The one that was waiting with a patience you never quite managed yourself. You have not arrived. But you have done something more important than arrive. You have stopped arguing with the accurate reflection. The lie had a very long run. Its run is over. Chapter 10. You were always the variable that mattered. You have made it to this page. That sounds like a small thing, but it is not. Most people who buy books like this one put them down somewhere around chapter 3. They feel the recognition, they feel the discomfort, and then quietly, carefully, they return the book to the shelf. The shelf goes back to the corner. The corner goes back to the life they were already living. You did not do that. Right now I want to ask you something that is not rhetorical, something you should actually answer inside yourself. Not later. Now, what changed in you while you were reading? Because something did. You can feel it or you cannot, but either way the answer to that question is the same answer to a much larger one that has been sitting open since the very first chapter. The question is simply this: if the gap was never really about money, what was it actually about? Sit with that. We will close it before this chapter is done. 9 chapters ago, you looked in a mirror. That was the metaphor this book opened with: you, standing in front of a reflection, seeing the version of yourself that your current beliefs had constructed. That person was not a failure. That person was not broken or undeserving. That person was simply someone who had accepted a set of invisible instructions about what they were allowed to become, and had followed those instructions with extraordinary consistency. The lie had a very long run. Its run is over. Here is what you have covered since that mirror. You have learned that the inner thermostat is not a metaphor but a mechanism, a real and measurable pattern of self-correction. It pulls your financial results back toward whatever temperature your identity has set as normal. You have seen that the 𝗓𝗓𝗧𝗘 frame, the cultural story that says wealth is primarily a product of how hard you work or when you were born, was never really explaining success. It was explaining the absence of success in a way that felt acceptable, a way that let everyone involved keep their dignity without requiring any of them to change. Dignity without change is a comfortable prison. You know that now. Think about who you were 3 years ago. Not emotionally, specifically. What did you believe was possible for you financially? What did you assume your life would look like at 30, at 40, at 50? Where did those assumptions come from? Who handed them to you? Did they hand them to you intentionally, or did they simply pass down what had been passed to them? Most of what you believe about money was not chosen. It was inherited like furniture in a house you never agreed to rent. Here is a woman named Carmen. She was 31 years old, running a small graphic design business, earning just enough to feel like success was close but never quite arriving. She told herself the problem was her pricing, then her niche, then her location, then the economy. Every year she diagnosed a new cause and applied a new solution. Every year her income settled back into almost exactly the same range. Her accountant noticed before she did. He showed her 3 years of numbers in a row, and the total figure was nearly identical each time. Carmen laughed, but it was the uncomfortable kind. She said, "That's wild." Her accountant said nothing. She went home that night and could not sleep. She kept asking herself how 3 completely different strategies had produced the same number. The answer came to her at 2 in the morning. The strategies had not produced the number. She had, not through failure, through an unconscious ceiling she had never once examined. Within 8 months of naming that ceiling, her income broke through it, not because her strategy changed, because she stopped correcting back to a number she no longer believed in. That is not magic. That is not luck wearing a convenient story. That is the inner thermostat operating in reverse for the first time. Carmen's conflict was not with the market. It was with an accurate perception of herself. And that brings us to the revelation this entire book has been building toward, the one that makes everything else in these pages cohere. The gap between you and a millionaire was never a skills gap. It was never a network gap or a timing gap or a gap in information. The gap was a perception gap. Specifically, it was the distance between who you actually are and who you believed you were. The millionaire is not someone who found the right opportunity. The millionaire is someone whose self-perception was large enough that opportunity had somewhere to land. The same door stood in front of both of you. One of you believed the door was for them. The other one was not sure. This is the open loop that has been waiting since this chapter began. What changed in you while you were reading? Here is what I think happened. I think you started to recognize yourself, not the diminished version that years of inherited beliefs constructed, but something underneath it. Something that kept reading, kept questioning, kept refusing to put the book back on the shelf. That part of you is not new. It was there before the first page. The reading did not create it. The reading revealed it. Wealth is not a portfolio. It is a personality, not in the casual sense of charm or charisma. In the structural sense, the deep, durable configuration of beliefs that determine what you allow yourself to receive, what you allow yourself to build, and what you allow yourself to keep. You can renovate that configuration. You have been doing it throughout this book. Every moment of recognition, every time you thought, "That's me," and felt a small, uncomfortable warmth in your chest, that was renovation work. Small and invisible and completely real. The mirror returns now. Not the one from the first chapter. This mirror is different. This time, the reflection looking back is the version of you who has already closed the gap. Not the millionaire as a fantasy, not a stranger in an expensive car, but you with an accurate perception of your own worth, your own capacity, and your own authority over your financial life. That reflection has been waiting. It was not waiting for luck. It was not waiting for the right market or the right moment or the right mentor. It was waiting for you to stop arguing with it. The 𝗓𝗓𝗧𝗔𝗡𝗧 frame had one final hiding place. It was this, the belief that even if identity mattered, yours specifically was not quite enough. You were willing to accept the principle for other people, for the carman in the story, for the abstract listener of a book, for someone who had somehow gotten a better starting position than you. But for yourself, there was always a quiet asterisk. Always a footnote that said, "Yes, but in your case there is still something missing." There is nothing missing. The variable that determined your financial life has always been you. Not a version of you that needs to be fixed. Not a you that needs more credentials or more confidence or more years of effort to earn the right to this. The you that is listening right now. This is the initiation, not the instruction. You have not just learned something. You have crossed into a new way of seeing yourself, and you cannot fully uncross it. The lie has had its run. You are the cause. You were always the cause. The money was always the effect of a self that fully believed in its own credibility. And that self is now standing exactly where it was always supposed to stand. Say this aloud once and mean it. I am not waiting to become someone who deserves this. You already did.